The summons. Ambassador Thelvax of the Korthan Dominion materialized in the Grand Convocation Chamber with considerably less dignity than usual. His crystalline form flickered erratically, betraying his agitation as he took his designated position among the circular assembly. Around him, representatives from 47 star systems were appearing in rapid succession, each looking equally disturbed. The emergency beacon had activated only twice in the Council's 7,000-year history. Once during the Plague of Endless Night. Once when the void behemoths had emerged from dark space. That the beacon now pulsed its crimson urgency meant something catastrophic had occurred. Chancellor Mirasin, a being of pure thought given form through ancient psychic architecture, manifested at the chamber's center. Her presence radiated concern rather than her usual measured calm. Honored delegates, her voice resonated directly in their consciousness, we face an unprecedented situation. 3 cycles ago, we welcomed a new species into our galactic community. The humans of Sol 3, called Earth by its inhabitants. Delegate Zornrak, whose 4 arms gestured in his species equivalent of a shrug, interrupted. The primitives who barely achieved faster-than-light travel? What threat could they possibly pose? That, Mirasin replied grimly, is what we are here to discuss. Delegate Kashera, please present your findings. A serpentine figure uncoiled from the shadows, her iridescent scales catching the chamber's ambient light. Kashera served as the Council's chief of xenocultural integration, responsible for helping new species adapt to galactic civilization's complex protocols. 17 days ago, Kashera began, her forked tongue tasting the air nervously, I assigned the human delegation what we believed to be a simple diplomatic exercise. They were to navigate the bureaucratic maze of Tolvanth. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. The maze was legendary, a multidimensional puzzle of regulations, forms, and procedures designed to test a species' patience and attention to detail. Most civilizations required decades to complete it properly. Some never did. The average completion time, Kashera continued, is 43 standard years. The record, held by the Prax Collective, is 11 years 2 months. How long did the humans take? Asked Ambassador Thelvax, already dreading the answer. 17 minutes. The chamber erupted in chaos. Voices, thoughts, and energy signatures crashed against each other in a cacophony of disbelief. Impossible. They must have cheated. Did they destroy it? Mirasin raised a tendril for silence. Please let her finish. Kashera's image shifted, projecting a holographic recording. It showed 3 humans, 2 females and 1 male, standing before the maze's entrance. The taller female, whose identification badge read Captain Yara Okonkwo, studied the endless corridors of filing cabinets, each containing billions of forms and languages most species couldn't pronounce. This is bureaucracy, she said to her companions. Have you seen a DMV? The shorter female, Dr. Sena Vasquez, according to her badge, pulled out a small device. Already scanning for patterns. Give me 90 seconds. The male, engineer Dax Kowalski, was physically climbing the filing cabinets. Found the master index. It's hidden behind a false wall labeled, Absolutely do not touch under penalty of cosmic law. Of course it is, Captain Okonkwo laughed. Rule 1. If they tell you not to touch something, that's exactly what you need. What followed was a masterclass in creative problem-solving that bordered on alarming. Dr. Vasquez had somehow reprogrammed the maze's quantum locks using principles the Council's best scientists didn't recognize. Engineer Kowalski had discovered 13 shortcuts that technically weren't violations but exploited loopholes no one had noticed in millennia. Captain Okonkwo had simply sweet-talked a maintenance drone into giving them administrative access by offering it something called coffee and empathy. The recording ended with all 3 humans submitting the completed documentation, every form filled perfectly, every regulation satisfied, in less time than it took most species to find the entrance. That's not all, Kashera said softly. We gave them our standard galactic ethics examination. Multiple choice, 10,000 questions, designed to ensure new species understand our values. And they argued with it. For 6 hours. They contested 47% of the questions, claiming the scenarios presented false dichotomies or assumed facts not in evidence. Then they submitted their own revised version, which our philosophy department admits is actually more logically consistent. Ambassador Thelvax felt his crystalline structure vibrate with anxiety. What are you saying? I'm saying, Kashera replied, that in 3 weeks the humans have identified 17 inefficiencies in our governmental structure, accidentally solved a mathematical proof our greatest minds have worked on for centuries, and started what they call a book club, that now has members from 30 systems questioning previously accepted doctrine. Chancellor Mirasin's form pulsed with deep concern. The question before this council is simple. What do we do about the humans? The human delegation. The debate raged for 3 standard hours before Chancellor Mirasin finally called for order. Proposals ranged from immediate expulsion to complete quarantine of the Sol system. Delegate Zornrak had even suggested memory wipes, though that was quickly voted down as both unethical and likely ineffective. We should hear from the humans themselves, suggested Ambassador Thelvax, surprising himself with the idea. Perhaps direct dialogue would illuminate their intentions. The chamber fell silent. It was unconventional to bring the subjects of an emergency session into the proceedings, but these were unconventional circumstances. Very well, Mirasin agreed. Summon the human delegation. Captain Yara Okonkwo entered first, her dark skin gleaming under the chamber's ethereal light, her uniform crisp and professional. She moved with the confident grace of someone who had commanded starships through asteroid fields and diplomatic dinners with equal skill. Behind her came Dr. Sena Vasquez, whose intelligent eyes were already analyzing every detail of the chamber's architecture, and engineer Dax Kowalski, who had the unfortunate habit of looking friendly and approachable, which several species found deeply unsettling. Captain Okonkwo, Mirasin addressed her formally, this council has convened to discuss concerns about your species' integration into galactic society. Yara's eyebrow arched slightly. Concerns? We followed every protocol you've given us. That is precisely the problem, Keshera interjected. You followed them too well too quickly. You found efficiencies we never intended to exist. So we're in trouble for being good at following rules? Dax asked, genuinely confused. Delegate Zornrak leaned forward, his multiple eyes focusing on the humans. Your species has been spacefaring for barely a generation. You should be struggling with basic concepts, not revolutionizing systems that have existed for millennia. Sena adjusted her glasses, an affectation since human vision could easily be corrected, but she claimed they helped her think. With respect, Delegate, maybe those systems needed revolutionizing. The bureaucratic maze wasn't testing our patience. It was testing whether we'd accept inefficiency as inevitable. We don't. Why not? Thelvax asked, genuinely curious. Yara stepped forward. Because we can't afford to. Do you know what Earth was like when we developed faster-than-light travel? We had climate catastrophes, resource wars, 7 different countries with nuclear weapons pointed at each other, and a global pandemic that killed millions. We didn't have the luxury of taking 43 years to fill out paperwork. We learned to solve impossible problems quickly, Dax added, because the alternative was extinction. When you're trying to feed 9 billion people on a planet that's actively trying to kill you, you get creative. Or you die, Sena finished bluntly. The chamber absorbed this information. Most council species had achieved spaceflight during periods of relative planetary peace. The concept of reaching for the stars while simultaneously fighting for survival was foreign to them. Councillor Vexith, a gaseous being whose containment field shimmered with bioluminescent patterns, spoke for the first time. Your world was dying and you chose to explore the cosmos? Why not fix your planet first? We did both, Yara replied. Humans are excellent multitaskers. We had to be. This adaptability you describe, Mirasin observed, it sounds exhausting. It is, Sena admitted. But it's also who we are. You want to know why we finished your maze so fast? Because compared to trying to coordinate disaster relief across 7 continents with 12 different languages and 40 different political systems, your puzzle was actually refreshingly straightforward. Delegate Keshera pulled up another hologram. Explain this then. You were given our standard welcome gift, a basic replicator capable of producing simple foods. Within 1 week, you had modified it to produce complex medicines and submitted the schematics to our medical database as open source, whatever that means. Dax grinned. It means free for everyone to use and improve. Where we come from, sharing knowledge saves lives. Why would we keep it to ourselves? Because knowledge is power, Zornrak stated flatly. Because advantages are meant to be leveraged. That's a sad way to live, Yara said softly. The simple statement hung in the air like an indictment. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. You judge us. Vexith's field flared with indignation. No, Yara corrected. We pity you. You've had thousands of years of peace and prosperity, and you've used it to build mazes and tests instead of solutions. You've made complexity for its own sake, not because it serves anyone. You've been in space for 3 weeks, Thelvax said carefully, and you believe you understand galactic civilization better than we do? Senna smiled. We don't understand it better, but we question it more. And apparently that terrifies you. The truth of her words silenced the entire council. The real problem. Chancellor Mirasin dimmed her luminescence, a sign of deep contemplation among her kind. Captain Okonkwo, help us understand. What do you see when you look at the Galactic Council? Yara considered the question carefully, knowing her answer would shape humanity's future among the stars. She glanced at her companions, receiving subtle nods of encouragement. I see good people who've forgotten how to be great, she said finally. You've built a civilization that prizes stability over progress, procedure over purpose. You've made peace, which is admirable, but you've also made stagnation, which is tragic. Stagnation. Councillor Vexitha's containment field rippled with offense. We have maintained galactic harmony for 7,000 years. Yes, Senna interjected, pulling up her datapad. And in those 7,000 years, your medical technology has advanced by approximately 4%. Your energy efficiency has improved by 2.3%. Your faster-than-light drives are using the same principles they did 6 millennia ago. Because those systems work, Delegate Zornrak countered. Why fix what isn't broken? Because not broken isn't the same as optimal, Dax replied. You've got 47 species in this council. 47 different perspectives, biologies, and ways of thinking. You could be innovating constantly, but instead you're filing forms in triplicate. Ambassador Thelvax's crystalline structure resonated with a sound like wind chimes. You presume much for newcomers. Perhaps our stability is precisely because we don't rush toward every shiny new idea that presents itself. Fair point, Yara conceded. But there's a difference between wisdom and fear. You're not moving slowly because you're cautious. You're frozen because you're afraid. Afraid of what? Mirasin asked. Conflict, Senna said. Change inevitably creates disagreement. You've built this elaborate bureaucracy not to serve the people, but to prevent anyone from rocking the boat. Every form, every procedure, every maze, they're not tests of competence. They're barriers to change. Kashera's scales flushed deeper colors. You know nothing of our history. Before the council, there were wars that consumed entire star systems. Billions died. This bureaucracy you mock has kept the peace. We're not mocking it, Yara said gently. We're questioning whether the price of peace should be paralysis. Earth had wars too. Terrible ones. But we learned that lasting peace doesn't come from making change impossible. It comes from making cooperation irresistible. Delegate Zornrak slammed one of his 4 fists on his console. Enough philosophy. The issue remains. In 3 weeks you have disrupted protocols that took us centuries to establish. Your very presence destabilizes our carefully balanced system. Then maybe your system is too fragile, Dax said quietly. The chamber erupted again. This time, Mirasin let it continue for several minutes before calling for order. When silence finally returned, her voice carried a weight it hadn't before. The human has spoken a truth we have long avoided, she announced. We have built a civilization that fears its own potential. Delegate Kashera, show them the forbidden archive. Kashera recoiled. Chancellor, that archive has been sealed for. Show them. With visible reluctance, Kashera projected a new hologram. It showed thousands of proposals, inventions, and ideas, each marked with a red seal. These are innovations submitted by various species over the past millennium, Mirasin explained. Each one was rejected by the council. Senna scrolled through the list, her expression growing increasingly horrified. This one could have eliminated 70% of energy waste across the galaxy. This medical advancement would have saved millions of lives. This agricultural technique? Why were these rejected? Too disruptive, Vexith admitted. Implementation would have required restructuring existing systems, retraining populations, challenging established interests. So you chose comfort over progress, Yara said, not as an accusation but as a statement of fact. Thelvax felt something crack inside his crystalline consciousness, a realization he'd been avoiding for centuries. We became what we most feared. We created our own stagnation in the name of preventing conflict. The humans aren't the problem, Mirasin continued. They're the mirror showing us what we've become. In 3 weeks, they've accomplished what none of us dared attempt in millennia. They've asked why not. So what now? Zornrak asked, his earlier bluster deflated. Yara looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives of dozens of worlds. Now you have a choice. You can exile us, quarantine humanity, and go back to your comfortable stagnation. Or you can accept that we're going to keep questioning, keep innovating, and keep pushing for better. Even if it makes us uncomfortable? Keshara asked. Especially then, Senna replied. Growth is supposed to be uncomfortable. That's how you know it's working. The divide. The council session adjourned for deliberation, leaving the human delegation in a luxurious waiting area that felt more like a gilded cage. Yara paced while Senna analyzed data on her tablet and Dax attempted to befriend a maintenance drone that seemed utterly baffled by the concept. That could have gone better, Dax observed, offering the drone another cup of coffee, which it had no mechanism to consume. Could have gone worse too, Senna countered. At least they're talking instead of shooting. They don't shoot, Yara said. That's kind of the whole problem. They don't do anything decisive. Back in the council chamber, the debate had split the delegates into three distinct factions. Ambassador Thelvax found himself unexpectedly leading those who saw potential in humanity's disruptive presence. Beside him stood a small but growing group of younger delegates who had secretly been frustrated with the council's glacial pace for years. The humans are correct, Thelvax argued, his crystalline form pulsing with newfound conviction. We have prioritized stability to the point of decay. My own people submitted a proposal for advanced water purification 17 cycles ago. It's still under review. Councillor Vexith led the opposition, his containment field crackling with agitation. And what happens when every species decides to be like the humans? Yes. Our systems exist for reasons. Reasons written in the blood of ancient wars you're all too young to remember. I remember, said Elder Morthan, a being so ancient she existed partially out of phase with normal time. Her appearance silenced both factions. She rarely spoke, serving primarily as a living historical record. I was there when we wrote these protocols. Vexith is correct, they were born from tragedy. But Thelvax is also correct. We built a cage and called it civilization. Then what do you propose, Elder? Mirasin asked. A test, Morthan replied. Give the humans a real problem. Not a bureaucratic puzzle, but something that has genuinely stymied this council. Let us see if their disruptive methods produce results or merely chaos. Delegate Zornrak, who led a third faction of undecided members, leaned forward. What kind of problem? The refuge crisis, Morthan said, and the chamber's atmosphere immediately darkened. The refuge crisis was the council's most shameful secret. 300 years ago, a star had gone nova unexpectedly in the Kethral system. 17 billion refugees had fled to neighboring systems, creating a humanitarian disaster that the council had been managing for 3 centuries. Manage, in this case, meant warehousing refugees in temporary facilities that had become permanent prisons, processing asylum requests at a rate that would take another 500 years to complete. You want to give the humans access to the refuge crisis? Vexith was aghast. They'll dismantle every carefully negotiated agreement we have in place. Good, Morthan said simply. Those agreements have failed 17 billion sentient beings for 300 years. Perhaps they deserve to be dismantled. The vote was called. By a narrow margin, the proposal passed. When the human delegation was summoned back, they found the council transformed. The earlier hostility had evolved into something more complex, anticipation mixed with dread. Captain Okonkwo, Mirasin began, we have decided to offer humanity a choice. You may leave galactic space peacefully, return to your system with our blessing and non-interference. Or you may attempt to solve a problem that has defeated this council for 3 centuries. Senna and Dax looked at Yara, who didn't hesitate. What's the problem? Keshara projected the horrifying statistics. Refugee camps spanning entire moons. Children born and dying without ever seeing a real sky. Species mixing in desperate poverty, creating cultural tensions that occasionally erupted into violence. Supply chains so tangled that aid often rotted in warehouses while people starved kilometers away. Dear God, Senna whispered. You did this? Dax asked, his friendly demeanor evaporating. You have the resources of 47 star systems and you let this happen? We have protocols, Zornrak said defensively. Asylum requests must be verified, resources must be allocated fairly, cultural sensitivities must be. People are dying, Yara cut him off, her voice cold as vacuum. Everything else is details. Precisely the kind of oversimplification that leads to disaster, Vexith countered. We tried quick solutions early on. They failed spectacularly. Then you tried slow solutions and they failed even more spectacularly, Senna shot back. 300 years. How is that acceptable? It isn't, Thelvax said quietly. That's why we're asking you to try. Yara looked at her team. Dax's jaw was set with determination. Senna was already pulling up data, her fingers flying across her tablet. She turned back to the council. We'll do it, but we do it our way. No bureaucratic approvals, no committees, no waiting for consensus. You give us authority, resources, and stay out of our way. Unacceptable, Vexith began. Then 17 billion beings stay in hell while you debate, Yara replied. Your choice, counselor. The human solution. The humans were given 72 hours and a single council liaison, Ambassador Thelvax, who had volunteered despite knowing it would likely end his political career. They stood in what had been designated as their operations center, a converted cargo bay that Dax was already filling with holographic displays and improvised equipment. Okay, Yara said, addressing the small team they'd assembled. Let's break down this nightmare. Senna, what are we looking at? Senna projected a three-dimensional model of the crisis. 17.3 billion refugees spread across 42 facilities in 9 star systems. 317 different species, each with unique biological, cultural, and dietary requirements. Current processing rate, approximately 15,000 asylum approvals per year. At that rate, Dax calculated, complete processing would take 1.15 million years. That's insane, one of the junior human diplomats, Marcus Webb, muttered. No, that's bureaucracy untethered from reality, Yara corrected. Thelvax, walk me through the approval process. The crystalline ambassador shimmered nervously. Each refugee must submit a Form 7734B documenting their departure circumstances. This is reviewed by a species-specific cultural liaison, then a legal expert in interstellar asylum law, then a resource allocation specialist who determines which system has capacity. Stop, Yara held up a hand. How long does each step take? The cultural liaison review averages 4 months. Legal review 6 to 8 months. Resource allocation can be done by algorithm, Senna interrupted, already coding. Species requirements, system capacities, travel logistics. This is just a matching problem. I can write a program to handle it in maybe a week. Thelvax's form flickered with distress. But the cultural nuances, the legal precedents, are being used as excuses for inaction, Yara said firmly but not unkindly. Thelvax, I need you to trust us. Can you do that? The ambassador thought of the refugee facilities he'd visited, the faces he'd seen, the hope he'd watched die over decades. Yes. Good. Now the real bottleneck isn't processing. It's housing. Even if we approve everyone tomorrow, where do they go? Marcus pulled up infrastructure data. Most council worlds are at maybe 60% residential capacity. They have room, they're just not using it. Why not? Dax asked. Because, Thelvax explained, permanent settlement requires infrastructure development, cultural integration programs, economic adaptation strategies, which require committees and approvals and environmental impact studies that take decades, Senna finished. We're seeing a pattern here. Yara walked around the holographic display, studying it from every angle. Her crew watched as she processed information the way she'd once processed tactical situations in Earth's defense fleet. Finally, she smiled, not a happy smile, but the smile of someone who'd just seen the solution to an impossible problem. We're thinking about this wrong, she announced. The council is trying to integrate refugees into existing systems. That's why everything takes forever. You're trying to fit square pegs into round holes while filling out forms about the pegs' feelings. What's the alternative? Thelvax asked. We don't integrate them. We empower them to build new systems. The room fell silent. Explain, Marcus said. Yara's hands flew across the holographic controls, highlighting 3 uninhabited systems within the council's territory. These systems, perfectly habitable planets, no native sentience, decent resources. Why aren't they colonized? The colonial expansion protocols require 30 years of environmental study, resource surveys, cultural impact assessments. Even though there are no natives to impact? Dax shook his head. That's not caution, that's paralysis. Here's what we do, Yara continued, her plan taking shape. We move the refugees to these 3 systems. Not as wards of the council, but as colonists. We give them the resources and technology to build their own civilizations. That's unprecedented, Thelvax protested. The economic investment alone. Is less than you're spending maintaining those camps, Senna cut in, pulling up financial data. Way less. You're spending 40 billion credits annually keeping people in poverty. For half that, we could give them ships, fabricators, seeds, and basic infrastructure. And then what? Thelvax asked. 300 different species trying to build societies together? It could descend into chaos. Or it could become something beautiful, Yara countered. Humans have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. These people have survived Nova-level catastrophe. They're survivors, not victims. Stop treating them like problems to be managed and start treating them like the solution. Marcus was already running projections. If we redirect current camp maintenance funds, provide basic colonial packages, and implement Senna's approval algorithm, we could relocate the entire refugee population within 18 months. 18 months versus 500 years, Dax said. I know which one I'd choose. Thelvax's crystalline form pulsed with colors he'd forgotten he could make, colors associated with hope. The council will never approve this. Then we don't ask for approval, Yara said. We ask for forgiveness. You in? Implementation and resistance. The next 36 hours became a whirlwind of activity that the Galactic Council would debate for generations. Yara's team worked with ruthless efficiency, exploiting every loophole and technicality in council law that had accumulated over millennia of bureaucratic accretion. Senna's algorithm went live first, processing asylum requests at a rate of 10,000 per hour. She'd stripped away every redundant review, every unnecessary verification, every box-checking exercise that served no practical purpose. Each case was evaluated on simple criteria: verified identity, documentation of departure circumstances, and basic security screening. What had taken months now took minutes. Counselor Vexith discovered the algorithm during his morning review and immediately called an emergency session. This is illegal, his containment field crackled with fury. These approvals haven't been reviewed by cultural liaisons, haven't undergone legal scrutiny. Actually, Marcus Webb appeared via hologram, looking exhausted but triumphant. We reviewed council law very carefully. Those reviews are recommended, not required. And they're waived entirely in cases of extraordinary humanitarian urgency, which a 300-year-old crisis definitely qualifies as. You're twisting the law's intent. No, Senna's voice came through, we're following it. Maybe for the first time in centuries. While the council argued, Dax was already in the field. He'd taken a team to the largest refugee facility on Tolvanth Prime and was doing something no council official had done in decades, actually talking to the refugees. This is Elder Krenza, Dax said, projecting his meeting back to the operations center. The hologram showed a being whose species Yara didn't recognize, six-limbed, scaled, with eyes that held centuries of sorrow. She's been here for 247 years. Tell them what you told me, Elder. Krenza's voice was like gravel sliding down a mountain. I was a terraforming engineer on Kethral. Before the Nova, I helped make dead worlds bloom. Now I sit in this cage, filling out forms that ask me to prove I'm qualified to contribute to society. She laughed bitterly. I could rebuild entire ecosystems, but I can't pass your bureaucratic tests. How many others like you are there? Yara asked. Thousands, Krenza replied. Engineers, doctors, artists, teachers, all of our talents rotting while we wait for permission to be useful. Dax grinned. What if you didn't need permission? What if we gave you 3 empty planets and the tools to build whatever you want? The change in Krenza's demeanor was instantaneous. Her scales brightened, her posture straightened, and her eyes ignited with purpose. I would terraform them into paradises. Then let's do it, Dax said. Back in the council chamber, the debate had reached a fever pitch. Thelvax found himself defending decisions he'd made only hours ago, standing against colleagues he'd worked with for centuries. You've violated every protocol, Delegate Zornrak accused. You've circumvented proper channels, ignored established procedures. I've chosen people over paperwork, Thelvax replied, his voice resonating with unexpected strength. And if that costs me my position, so be it. This sets a dangerous precedent, another delegate argued. If anyone can simply ignore our processes when they disagree, then maybe our processes are the problem. The shout came from an unexpected source, Delegate Ishka, a typically quiet representative from a minor system. She stood, her bioluminescent tendrils glowing with agitation. I have been on this council for 90 years. In that time, I've watched us debate 17 different solutions to the refuge crisis. We've formed committees, commissioned studies, held symposiums. And what has changed? Nothing. Because we're more invested in appearing thoughtful than in actually helping. Elder Morthen, who had been silent throughout the debate, finally spoke. The humans have been in the galaxy for 1 month. In that time they've accomplished more than we have in 3 centuries. This should shame us. It's reckless. Vexith insisted. Perhaps, Morthen agreed. But sometimes the greatest wisdom is knowing when to be foolish. Meanwhile, Yara was meeting with refugee community leaders via holoconference, explaining the colonization plan. The response was overwhelming, and not universally positive. You want us to build new worlds? One leader challenged. We've been beaten down for 300 years, and now you expect us to have the strength to pioneer? No, Yara replied honestly. I expect you to be angry enough to prove everyone wrong. The council thinks you're broken. I think you're survivors who've been prevented from thriving. Prove me right. Another leader, representing a collective of artisan species, asked the critical question, and when we build these worlds, when we create something beautiful from nothing, will the council try to take them from us? Thelvax, joining the conference, answered before Yara could. Not while I draw breath. These will be your worlds, governed by your laws, shaped by your dreams. The council will provide support, not control. You can promise that? The artisan leader pressed. No, Thelvax admitted. But I'll fight for it. And I suspect the humans will too. Yara smiled. You suspect correctly. The new paradigm. 6 months later, Yara stood on the surface of a planet that didn't have an official name yet. The refugees who'd begun settling it were still debating between 17 different proposals, which she found appropriately chaotic and human-like. Around her, impossible things were happening. A Kethralian engineer directed a team of builders from 6 different species, constructing what would become the planet's first permanent city. The design was unlike anything in council space, a fusion of architectural styles that shouldn't work together but somehow did, creating something entirely new. In orbit, Dax was helping coordinate the arrival of the 8th wave of colonists. His makeshift traffic control system was held together with improvisation and hope, but it was processing more ships per day than most council spaceports. Senna hadn't left her lab in 3 days. She was working with refugee scientists who'd been forced into idleness for decades, and their combined innovations were alarming the council's technology assessment board on an hourly basis. Captain Okonkwo, a familiar crystalline voice chimed behind her. Yara turned to find Ambassador Thelvax, who now bore the title of Council Liaison to the Refuge Worlds, a position that had been created specifically for him after his actions had made his previous role untenable. Ambassador, she greeted him warmly. Come to check on your investment? Our investment, he corrected. Though I must admit, the reality exceeds even my hopes. They watched as a group of young refugees, children who'd never known anything but camps, played in actual dirt under an actual sky for the first time in their lives. Their laughter echoed across the construction site. The council is in turmoil, Thelvax reported. Councillor Vexith has resigned. 15 delegates have followed his example, claiming the humans have corrupted galactic civilization beyond repair. That's unfortunate, Yara said, though she didn't sound particularly concerned. It's also liberating, Thelvax continued. The paralysis has broken. Delegates who've been frustrated for centuries are suddenly proposing changes, demanding action. That forbidden archive Elder Morthen showed you? We've approved 47 innovations from it in the last month alone. And the ones who resigned? Are being replaced by younger beings who see what you've accomplished here and want to do more of it. The galaxy is changing, Captain. Because you refused to accept that it couldn't. Marcus Webb joined them, dusty and exhausted. Final count from the census. 16.9 billion refugees have been approved for relocation. The remaining 400 million have chosen to stay in their current systems. They're being fast-tracked for citizenship. All of them? Yara asked, surprised. Turns out when you process applications efficiently instead of sitting on them, things move fast. Who knew? Marcus grinned. A commotion drew their attention. Elder Krenza was approaching, accompanied by a delegation of senior refugees. The old terraformer had transformed in 6 months, looking decades younger as she engaged in the work she'd been born to do. Captain Okonkwo, Krenza said formally, the Council of Refugees, all 317 species, have asked me to speak for them. Yara nodded, suddenly uncertain. Success or failure would be determined not by council approval but by whether they'd actually help these people. We have decided to name this world, Krenza continued. We considered many options, honoring our lost homes, celebrating our new beginning. But we chose differently. She gestured, and a holographic projection appeared, the planet from orbit, with a name emblazoned across it, Terra Hope. Terra for Earth, Krenza explained. Because your world gave us humans who remembered that kindness is also a form of strength. And hope because you gave us back something we'd forgotten we'd lost. Yara felt unexpected tears forming. Elder Krenza, you gave us more than new worlds, the old engineer interrupted gently. You reminded us that we are builders, not beggars. Creators, not victims. You saw us when others saw only problems to be managed. Thelvax's crystalline form shimmered with colors Yara had learned to recognize as joy. The council has asked me to extend an invitation. They wish to form a new branch, the Department of Practical Solutions. They want humans to lead it. Let me guess, Dax said, wandering over. It'll require filling out forms in triplicate? Actually no, Thelvax replied, surprising them all. The enabling legislation is 3 pages long. I wrote it myself. Yara laughed, a real genuine laugh that startled the nearby workers. 3 pages? Ambassador, you're learning? I had good teachers, he replied. As the sun set on Terra Hope, casting long shadows across a civilization being born, Senna finally emerged from her lab. She looked terrible and wonderful, exhausted and energized. You need to see this, she announced, pulling up a hologram. The refugees and I have been working on something. Remember how the council said we'd disrupt their carefully balanced systems? Yes. Yara prompted. They were right. Look at this. The hologram showed a map of council space. Green indicators marked locations where the refugee innovations were spreading, new technologies, new methods, new ways of thinking about old problems. The green was everywhere, transforming the map into a constellation of change. It's a revolution, Marcus whispered. It's evolution, Yara corrected. The council had become an echo chamber. We didn't just solve the refuge crisis. We introduced genetic diversity into their civilization. They'll never be the same, Thelvax observed. Neither will we, Yara replied, looking at her team, at the refugees who'd become partners, at the impossible thing they'd built together. Good, Dax said simply. A message chimed on Yara's communicator. She opened it to find a transmission from Earth, from Admiral Chin of the fleet. Captain Okonkwo, the Admiral's message read, your reports have been circulating through command. Apparently, you've revolutionized galactic civilization before breakfast. Well done. Also, we're sending 7 more ships full of diplomats, engineers, and 1 very enthusiastic anthropologist who won't stop talking about first contact opportunities. Try not to reform the entire galaxy before they arrive. Chin out. Yara shared the message with her team. 7 more ships of humans, Senna mused. The council's going to panic. Let them, Yara said, watching the sun complete its descent on Terra Hope. They'll adapt. After all, we taught them how. In orbit above, a council monitoring station recorded everything. The officer on duty, a junior delegate named Tashir, watched the humans celebrate their success with refugees from 300 worlds. She drafted her report, paused, then deleted the standard bureaucratic language. Instead, she wrote simply, the humans have arrived. Everything is about to change. Recommendation, embrace it. She sent the report and smiled. Below, on Terra Hope and 41 other refugee facilities transforming into worlds, 17 billion beings looked toward futures that suddenly seemed possible again. The Galactic Council's emergency session had been called to address the human problem. The humans had solved it by proving there was never a problem at all, only an opportunity everyone else had been too afraid to seize. And in doing so, they'd shown the galaxy something it had forgotten, that the opposite of stagnation isn't chaos. It's growth.